you don't need 50 levels of an organization, which most organizations are. You need just a few, right? So as long as we follow what natural intelligence gives us, I think that's the best path, right? What does nature tell us about ourselves, from the universe, from biology, from neuroscience, from physics, and apply those things to us, not what does some, pseudoscientific, speaker at such and such conference say I ought to do. Look at the science. What's the science tell us? And it's going to evolve, right? We're going to learn more about ourselves, the more we learn about our universe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Dream Wonders series on the Mindplex podcast. Today, I have a guest who is not the typical guest on our podcast. Brian Rivera is a former U.S. Navy fighter pilot. So, Brian, welcome to the podcast. Just for our audience, I mean, you have an amazing experience in the Army and a lot of lessons that once you retired from service, you used to help organizations and I would say, the world at large deal with high uncertainty environment. Yes. So because you have this experience of operating in high stakes environments, and so you created this framework or co-created it with others that treats organizations more as living adaptive systems, the flow system. And thank you for sharing that with you. We will put it in the description. So you have the book, you have the playbook, the guide, everything, and of course an amazing TED talk that we will also post in the description. But let me start by asking you, Brian, what is flow? I mean, it seems like a mystical term to many people, especially, in our day and age when we learn so mechanistically in school that everything is linear. However, flow is a different animal. I mean, it's not easy to grasp in theory, and yet we all feel it when we experience it.
Mm-hmm.
Time stay still for 5 hours, and you don't notice. You are in complete focus. So tell us, what is flow, and how did you come across this?
Okay, so there's many aspects to flow that we can talk about, and I'll talk a little bit about my past in the military in the U.S. Navy. So first off, thanks for having me on your show, Dr. M. Mihaela. I really appreciate your time and conversations that we've had in the past. But to go back into your question, what is flow? Let's go back to peak performance. And I just heard this conversation on a podcast recently that artificial intelligence and robots are never going to be in a state of flow, right? And people may argue about that and say they'll be part of an Amazon fulfillment center with a flow process. Yeah, that's true, but they'll never be in a state of flow. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote about this quite a bit. And really, there's a lot of people looking into this right now. And I believe as we go forward into this new era of, super technology, AGI, active inference AI, and so forth, the only thing that we have left as humans is to find a way to peak perform. And that's what flow really is. Peak performance in my world, and I'll go back to my time in fighter aviation, I got to spend some time flying air shows. Air shows are very, very dangerous. All right. So I've lost more friends in air show demonstrations than I have in combat. Right. Just to give you a sense of that. I think the first time I flew an air show, right afterwards, I watched an aircraft crash right in front of me and the pilot died. So it's a very high risk environment, very unforgiving. So risk and novelty are a key component of flow, as so are skills, right? So we have the skill challenge balance. So this environment provides a interesting challenge for us, and we have to build the skills up to meet that. So peak performance is achieved when our internal skills inside of our OODA loop, and we may talk about that a little later on, but that implicit guidance control, that intuition is in resonance, I like to say that, with the external world, right? So we have this flow channel we go on and we get a lot of science of flow. So that's one aspect of flow that we talk about. But the flow system was really designed around a system of understanding on how organizations can adapt, how they can find agility, resilience and safety and innovation in a world that is just cluttered with features that we just can't get rid of. Things like uncertainty, entropy. We call it VUCA sometimes, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We have to deal with this ever-changing world, and we created the flow system based off of first principles. We could talk more about that on how that connects back to my experience in fighter aviation. But hopefully I answer your question just very high level. What is flow? I mean, you get into constructs of flow from the Toyota production system, working in fulfillment centers, seeing flow happen. You get into flow around an aircraft. There's different types of flows. There's I'm not going to go through all the flows. Flow systems on aircraft that are designed to continually push the aircraft forward. There's friction involved with it, so it depends. It's a loaded question, but flow is life. Flow is everything. Right?
That's true. It's a loaded question. And you
Mhm.
also opened a can of worms here by stating that AI will never be in a state of flow. And I have to, I don't want to focus our conversation on this,
Mhm.
but I have to say that there are two camps. One camp agrees with you, but
Mhm.
there are latest developments. And I just ran a series of 3 podcasts with 2 scientists, which I met at the Science of Consciousness conference,
Mhm.
and they are developing. They have discovered kind of the mechanism of what you say here: resonance with the external world, intuition, and so on. So they are
Mhm.
spelling that out. That's why three podcasts, because it's
Mhm.
so much
Yeah.
science and complexity. And they kind of, and together with others, including our team, we are working on actually spiritual artificial consciousness, if I can call
Mhm.
it this way, which can actually experience or exhibit presence. And I know it's a can
Mhm.
of worms, and I don't want to open it here. I just wanted to say that some windows are being opened now to this.
Yeah.
But let's come back to our peak performance and how you amazingly explained it for the rest of us. What this flow is and how it manifests, because we all know. Yeah, I mean, if you are skiing, yes, you feel this peak
Yes.
performance
Yeah.
exactly. Or if you are skating or whatever sports, or also when you are creating even a poetry. For me, I'm a poet as well, and immersed in that creative act. I think that's where you feel it. But I wanted to ask you, what is something you wish you knew about flow when you were in service, when you were in the military,
Oh,
and what was your aha moment about flow?
so let's go back 25 years in fighter aviation, and I'll just kind of paint a culture for you. Uh, we're not the brightest guys in the world. We really adapt to changing environments. And what I mean by that is, if you graduate from MIT with a 4.0 or 4.5 and come into fighter aviation, you're probably not going to be successful because you need some failure in your past, right? And that's what I'm kind of getting at. Is we're not the brightest guys in the world. We're just average
You
people,
are
if you
the
want.
most modest guys in the world, from what I
Uh,
get.
Oh, I appreciate that. Back then, and even now, when we look at peak performance, things that lead to that, what you eat matters, right? How much sleep you get matters. We have rules that say you can't, um, you can't have alcohol in your system 12 hours prior to flying. It's a rough rule, and then you need to have sleep, and you can call yourself out and say, "Hey, I didn't get enough sleep last night." So we had some basics, but things we didn't practice, and at least not the people that I know, are things like meditation, breathing techniques, right? Just how to become present before you go. Now, there's another aspect to this which leads to flow, and I want to talk about that. It's very, very important. It connects to team flow, and that is a ritual, right? So we talk about rituals quite a bit. Putting on a flight suit, going through the process of, we call it a team life cycle. You plan the plan, you brief the plan, you execute the plan, you debrief the plan. That is a construct that allows a team to get in flow, but more importantly, it's the interactions of how you do that planning, how you do that briefing, how you execute and communicate and collaborate, and how well you do the debrief, which includes creating the environment for psychological safety, right? So we're getting away from like the things that we were taught, we just naturally did in fighter aviation. The things that we didn't do, which were breathing techniques and meditation and not drinking alcohol. That's one thing that we could have done better, right? It's just eliminate that from your diet. But I wish I would have known that then. It doesn't mean we would have practiced it well. But the science has been out there for almost ever, right? Humans have been in a state of flow or trying to get to peak performance as best they can. Unfortunately, over the years, that's kind of been hijacked by charlatans and pseudoscience and people looking at the wrong thing and saying, here's what you need to do in your organization to create flow. And by the way, flow is the number one characteristic of a high performing team. It's when work just moves from one person to another, kind of like what you see in high performance sports, maybe in F1 racing, maybe in UFC fighting. When you watch an air show, right? When you do these things, you're watching performers. And let me add more to this: musicians, artists, comedians. You go to be part of that environment so you can be human. You want that connectedness to watching that human go to a state of flow. That's why we're there, right? So, I'm kind of getting off target here, but going back to your question, one of the things I wish I would have known 25 years ago when we were flying in fighter jets, I wish I knew how to become present earlier, and that attunement to the environment. I wish I knew how to coach that then, like we do now, right? That's what I wish we would have been better at many, many years ago.
That's amazing, and it is, of course, something which is coming up more and more often also in our conversations here on the podcast, because we, of course, being experts in the development of the artificial general intelligence and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully machine consciousness as well, in spite of your, I would say, lack of confidence that we will succeed. We don't know, but we will
We don't
try.
yet.
So the thing is that exactly how do we actually consciousness is all about what you're saying here with
Mm-hmm.
tapping into that space, yeah, of presence.
Yeah.
And but you mentioned the role of rituals, and I think this is so important, and I'm telling you why I'm interested in this.
Mm-hmm.
Rituals is a means, a tool, a way to achieve team cohesion. Why? Because
Mm-hmm.
in my work, I've been working on this paradigm, also with the military, by the way, enabling the self-organizing security network and so on, in which
Mm-hmm.
you bring many organizations together with different ethos, many people, but even if it's in one organization, right, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
has their interest and whatever, um, how do you manage this flow that I can get the right skill at the right time at the right place when I need it, and everybody is focused and bringing their best in flow and not with friction? And I
Yeah.
think these rituals, do you have any experience with that? You call it kind of a collective social motion, right, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, so experience. I'll just go back to fighter aviation, naval aviation. You have 5 or 6 fighter squadrons on an aircraft carrier. All of them follow the same process, the same rituals. They all have a different culture, right? Different leadership styles, different things like that. Those things emerge from the interactions, of the agents, if you will, of the fighter crew members and the members of the organizations. They're all different. It doesn't mean they cannot work together, but they have some foundational uh, what do you want, a connective tissue or whatever, which they can all rely on. So the way we plan is very, very similar. The way we go through the team ritual of, we'll call it a team lifecycle: plan, execute, assess, or plan, brief, execute, debrief. The same thing that they call Scrum, by the way, just another thing.
Yes,
That
we,
that
we
that is,
know it in software. Yes.
yeah, it's the same thing. We might be able to make some connections to fighter aviation a little bit later. But going back to that, how do you do that? Well, the systems drive behaviors, right? The external environment, and this goes back to why we talk about OODA loop and ecological dynamics and things like the free energy principle, perceptual control theory, and adaptive resonance theory, things like that. Those type of things all are important to understanding how we work as humans, right? How living systems engage with the external environment. So if your rules of an organization are in conflict with what it takes to become in a state of flow or a high performing team, those rules, those incentives will drive the behaviors of the team. So you may have a 3-letter agency in the DoD or the government working with another 3-letter agency or another agency, and their incentives are all different. They're not going to be able to work together as a high performing team, or a team of teams, if you want to look at it that way. So it's the incentives within the organizations, the constraints in the organizations. If you want to talk about attractors or affordances in the environment, all those things matter when it comes to driving the behaviors, the collaborative behaviors, and the competing behaviors of organizations. So it's really looking at the external environment to understand what's driving the behavior of the system.
Amazing. You know, you mentioned so many things which are so resonant, no pun intended, with our work here. You know, like the
Mhm.
art adaptive resonance theory. I don't know if you meant Steven Grossberg seminal work on adaptive resonance theory. He invented the term, and he
Mhm.
has the book, and he incidentally was one of my mentors during my PhD. He is an
Oh,
expert
okay.
in consciousness and neural networks and so on. And all these things which you use, you know, attractors, I mean, all of them are also what we use in when we mathematically describe consciousness. So I see so much parallel here in what you do. But I wanted to ask you like a concrete question now. Is there a particular problem that you noticed in modern organizations when you or in the military that first convinced you that we need to take your experience and this framework, the flow system, inside organizations? So, what actually did you decide to solve?
Let's spend some time on this. So I want to, some truth in lending here. I want to tell you that I did watch the episode that you had with Professor. I'm going to get his name right, Grossberg or Gross. Yeah, yeah. And I went through adaptive resonance theory, and I was like, it's the same origins of John Boyd's OODA loop. So there's a lot of overlap we can look into. And then I also been doing a lot of stuff with the functional resonance analysis method from the safety community. Resonance being the key term here, right? So we definitely want to come back later, maybe not on this show, but some other time to look at those connections. So let me go back and walk through what I thought, was useful in fighter aviation and the military, and what I thought was useless when I came across into coaching. So I did 16 years of active duty. Many of those years were in fighter aviation, and when I left, I stayed in reserves for 12 years. So I did a total of 28 years. So I got to have my foot in the military. Right. Yeah. So I had I was wearing two uniforms, basically a civilian uniform and a military uniform for 12 years of my adult life there. Um, Going back to fighter aviation, what are the things that we learned? Goods and others. There's a lot of good things we learned, and there's a lot of things that don't have universal applicability, has bounded applicability. And I think a lot of people get this wrong. And I'll talk about that here. So, what do we learn? Big things. Fighter aviation. We learned plan, brief, execute, debrief. But more importantly, we learn those interactions that are important in that. And that comes from what is known as crew resource management. CRM are merged when we start putting a black box into commercial aircraft, and we start to capture what's actually happening in the cockpit when an aircraft ran out of gas or crashed on the ground. And we found out that it's not necessarily a mechanical thing, or a software thing. It's a wetware thing, right? It's up here. It's how we interact. So IO psychologists worked with people in the Navy, very important people in cognitive science like Gary Klein, Eduardo Salas, Scott Tannenbaum, and they developed this thing called crew resource management. The Navy took that and we built on it, and we implemented it in the 90s, mid 90s, right before I came into active duty. And everybody does it, right? You just have to do it. It's a thing that you go through, and we call it DAM class: decision making, assertiveness, mission analysis, communication, leadership, adaptability, and situational awareness. All these things people have heard of before, right? But we did this in such a way that it allowed us to become a crew, right? So not a team, a crew. So you can a crew is a way to hack the Tuckman model, if you will, right? There's no forming, storming, norming, performing. It's just right to performing. How do you do that? So that's what crew resource management taught us. And then later on, when we were working on the flow system with Professor John Turner, who teaches team science and complex adaptive systems theory, we learned that team science is built on aviation crew resource management, right? So that's probably the most important thing that we're taking, the framework, the team science or human factors training, and we're bringing that over to businesses. And you can see team steps and other things that look like CRM in healthcare and things like that. So number one, we actually learn how to work as a team. That's what we did in the military. That's what we did in naval aviation anyway. Not everybody learns that. So that's probably the best lesson we're bringing over from aviation. An okay lesson that we're bringing over, and this is it has bounded applicability, and I think a lot of people get this wrong, and that is something called effects-based operations. We learned effects-based operations in the early 2000s, right? So right right after 2001, 9/11, they really brought this forward, and it's really starting with the end in mind and working backwards from there. Right? What effects do you want? If you know your target, if you know these things, what are those things in your arsenal that you can put downrange and work backwards from your target in mind? Well, that is awesome in a complicated environment. So we're talking like Dave Snowden's Connective framework here. In a complicated environment, which I spent a lot of time in, and when you know a target, you know where it is, and you know where the missiles are around it, or where you think they are, that's kind of complicated. You put the human in the system, it becomes complex. But the methodology of working backwards from a high definition destination or a known future state is a complicated domain thing. Unfortunately, we don't always work in the complicated domain. We work in the complex domain where we can't take effects-based operations and bring that over. Now, I tried this, leaving the Air and Space Operations Center, which is a complicated thing, if you will. It's a known process, and bring it over to strategy when I became a foreign area officer. So we're working strategy in East Africa, and you can't use the same approach. By the way, I was trying to meld project management professional approaches from the PMBOK guide with EBO into strategy, and it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work, right? So, and why is that? Because you're taking a linear process and taking it to a nonlinear context. Context matters. So, in a complex environment, and I think a lot of my aviation brethren, they get this wrong. They come out, they jump out of the cockpit, and then they tell everybody, you got to, execute flawlessly, work with the end in mind, and work backwards. That's a myth. That works in a certain domain only. Where you have known unknowns, right? So in the land of unknown unknowns, you need to probe a little bit. You need a direction of travel. And this is where things like leader's intent come in, right? That's why it's very, very important. So there are great things you learned from naval aviation, fighter aviation, the military that work. And then there's another thing called high reliability organizations or high reliability theory. And that comes from Carl Weick, right? That's the mass observation of the flight decks of aircraft carriers. How do you take 18-year-old kids, rotate them out every 4 years, and you have a low, your safety record's pretty good in the most complex environment in the world, the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. How do you do that in nuclear power plants? How do you do that in nuclear submarines? How do we have these high reliability organizations? So that's something else that led me to like resilience engineering and what people call HOP today, human and organizational performance. A lot of these things are built on complex adaptive systems. And I think that's what we didn't get right in the military is we brought our linear things over and said, here, this is what you need to do in organizations. It may work here and there. But the truth is, it's understanding the complex adaptive systems nature of things, those first principles and how they match the context you're in. So I can go in a lot more detail, but right there, I just gave everybody how things ought to work, where to go look to build high performing teams. But here's the hard part. Ready for this? Very few organizations are going to do this because it's hard to do. You actually have to create the conditions. You have to set your system up to do it. And by the way, I'm talking to the 5% of the leaders out there that actually understand what I'm talking about. The other 95 are to go, hey, you know what? I'm learning Scrum. I'm doing Agile. I've got these people. I got these coaches over here. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to get your ass kicked in this as technology accelerates. And the only thing left of being human is peak performance, right? You're done. So if you don't understand flow or how these things work, the days of chasing Scrum, certifications, doing things like that, following linear approaches, you're done. It's over.
Definitely. No, and of course, I mean, I don't blame them too much because
No.
it's clear to me that you have had this opportunity and in the military and in your environment. Definitely, you had this unique training and skills, and you mentioned a lot. And I will ask you when we post to put in the description all this background and learnings
Mm-hmm.
and maybe some books so people can have access. But it is clear that it is a completely different way of looking at things, and of course experiential, like you experience, you know it, you incorporated it, and you are ready now to share it with the leaders so that they can actually implement that in their organizations. But I can see, that there is they don't know how. I mean, we
No,
nobody is
no,
teaching us in school like you were taught.
no. You don't learn. No, no.
Yeah,
I
that's a
want.
big
I want to add one more thing, and I think this is very
please.
important. I glossed over. Or actually, I didn't even talk about it. The concept of mission command, which is absolutely critical, fed into what many people now know as product ownership. right? Mission command is what all leaders need to learn how to do. I'll just give you a quick description of it. You want to push information to those closest to the problem, those that are actually working on the front lines with their customers, or whatever you want to do. You don't need them to give you all the information. You need to go to them, right? So you create an environment where you build this adaptive capacity within your workforce, right? And I think a great way to think about this for those of you who are following professional sports right now, there's something out of ecological dynamics called the constraints-led approach. And what they do is they use the concept of affordances, the environment, to help people, sports athletes, pay attention to those things that are in when they're playing basketball or football, and you build this dynamic capability that really creates agility, right? So mission command is something we learned in fighter aviation. In fact, you have a role called a mission commander when you go flying. And our process was actually created by, I don't know if this is necessarily true, but everybody's seen the movie Top Gun Maverick and Top Gun, all right? So Top Gun is a school where we send people to learn tactics and leadership. Seriously, it's a leadership thing. So mission command is a leadership apprenticeship model, right? We all go through that. All of us learn how to be those mission commanders. And it's a process. It's a leadership apprenticeship thing, right? Where we have to do certain things. And it's really showing how we can do the basics, how we can coach, how we can train others, and how we can lead the important things of planning, briefing, executing, and debriefing. This is not anywhere, it's not being taught in businesses today. They just don't understand this. Instead, they follow the frameworks. We got to do this thing, got to do that, but they don't learn the how and the why. And that's I think what's important of the flow system is we go into a lot of the why, some of the what, and then the how are the techniques that we teach and things like that.
Yes, and I mean, you put Tom Cruise now again on the map,
Mm-hmm.
so everybody's gonna watch Top Gun again for Christmas to,
Yeah.
to refresh their
Mm-hmm.
leadership and things. So, but you mentioned constraints, and so I'd like to clarify this a bit because at least from how I understood your guide, flow would suggest also constraint-free environment, yeah, where freedom and power to the edge to make decisions would actually enable this self-organization and adaptation. Is it so, or I did not understand when I
Yeah,
read?
yeah. So I think there's a misnomer or misconception of constraints that are out there. People think you have to remove constraints, right? That's not always true. Sometimes you have to put, like I think Alicia Herrero calls them, enabling constraints. What are those guardrails in the system, right? What are those things that allow us to adapt? And there's a deep dive into this with Dave Snowden's work and Alicia Herrero's work in constraints that many people like to go into. Like feedback loop is a constraint, right? So we talk about John Boyd's OODA loop. It's a constraint. So when you put a constraint such as, hey, I want to create an environment where we can find teams that flourish, we're going to use plan, brief, execute, debrief, and we're going to go ahead and implement team development intervention, and we're going to create our systems that support that. Those are constraints you can put on a system, right? There are other constraints. Hey, everybody's going to do Scrum. Well, that's probably a bad constraint, right? Not everybody needs to be doing Scrum, right? So constraints are not necessarily things you have to eliminate. There are things that you could bring into a system that enable it to um, think of it as a design principle, right? You identify the constraints in the system that allow you to move a currency through it more effectively and efficiently, which is basically the constructal law from Adrian Bejan, right? That's what we're trying to do there.
Yes, and I think this ties in very nicely because you mentioned flourishing and so on, and um, the guide explicitly ties this customer first delivery, right,
Mm-hmm.
to respect for the human, for humanity in general, and for people. And I think that's an important constraint which I put on
Yeah.
myself. Yes, and
Mm-hmm.
so what I wanted to ask you is. When you do that, for me it translates into ethics, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that is the respect. Yes, like translating into no exploitation. I will not work kids
Yeah.
to go in the mine and so on, so I can sell the jewelry whatever expensively.
Mm-hmm.
um, see the EpiPen story and all other things. I will not
Hmm.
cheat. I will follow the declared values. And so the question is, how do you help leaders to see that ethics is not just slogan, but actually to incorporate that as respect for humanity? Is there a way to?
Uh, that's a tough question.
It's
Like,
my
yeah,
biggest
yeah. Yeah,
question.
I mean, we talk about John Boyd quite a bit, and he looks at morals and ethics. And in fact, if you can attack those, that's generally how you can have a company, organization, or a state fold upon itself or fold in on itself, right? That's what you want to do. You attack those things. How do we embody that within like a flow, right, or a
I
flow
mean, I'm
system?
thinking like respect as a design constraint, if I may
Yeah,
call it like that. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So, okay, let's bring that up. So, respect as a design constraint. So, think Toyota production system, respect for people, that type of thing. How do you do that? Well, I think it's twofold, right? It's the external environment. How do you create the conditions um, that enable those internal states to embody that, right? To build that implicit guidance control, that repertoire up, that leads to actions that are aligned to that respect for people, right? So, I think we're all guilty of this. Screaming at the top of your lungs at somebody is probably not respect for people, but we've all been guilty of it at some point, right? So, human nature, how do we create the constraints
How do we
that
tame human nature?
yeah,
That's
how do we
more
tame?
like
Yeah, I think that's it, right? And that would be ethics and morality to me is how do we live within a rule of law, and how am I ensured that other people are abiding by those things too? That's something that you just brought up. This again, I want to go back to the system. If you look at the system driving behaviors, there are people acting um, within the bounds of the law, but unethically sometimes, right? Pushing things onto our bodies and things like that. Maybe putting food coloring in our food and not doing it over there and things like that. So the incentive process is driving that, and that's. I mean, this is a big question because I think this is the space you're working in, right?
yeah,
Um,
but also you answered it. I agree with the incentives because this is what actually tames human nature, right?
yeah, yeah,
Or guides it in a certain direction. So
yeah, and I think that the flatter the organization can be, the less power distribution within that system. I forgot the name of the power principle there, but if you can if you can get back to not necessarily a flat organization. I don't know if those really work, but stay with what anthropology and biology tells us about systems. You only need a couple levels of hierarchy, right?
nested, we
Unfortunately,
call it
yeah,
nested
nested, right. You
hierarchy.
don't
Yeah,
need 50 levels of an organization, which most organizations are.
yeah.
You need just a few, right? So as long as we follow what natural intelligence gives us, I think that's the best path, right? What does nature tell us about ourselves, from the universe, from biology, from neuroscience, from physics, and apply those things to us? Not what does some pseudoscientific
Exactly.
you know speaker at such and such conference say I ought to do. Look at the science. What's the science tell us? And it's going to evolve, right? We're going to learn more about ourselves, the more we learn about our universe.
I agree. And it's like when you say science, I agree. It's organic. It's like more the biology and
Yeah.
how actually the fundamentals, right? Not like the leadership science, whatever
Yeah.
they call it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And but so from here, I wanted to just to pivot a bit to the more let's say these competing values, because
Mhm.
in organizations, obviously, you also have people with competing values on teams, but also when you bring organizations together, as I mentioned, yeah, for example, at 9/11, you bring the firefighters, the police, the
Mhm.
army, everybody. So, and they each have different ethos and different, and I know I have many horror stories from there. Like, of course, usually, even if it's the only police and firefighters are more working as a team, police people as
Mhm.
individual, and if they arrive first, they block
Right.
the other teams because they want to take all the glory. So how do you deal with conflicting stakeholder value? Like, for example, in an organization, you have the customer, then you have the operator, the CEO, the team, the ecosystem partner, and each of them have different interests, right?
Mhm.
So how do you actually? Is there a way in which you can apply flow to this. I know it's not an easy
Yeah,
question.
yeah. I'll look at the team level stuff first, right? So there's an older definition of a team, which is two or more people working towards a shared goal, shared and it's a common goal. So it's a shared value, right? It's common, and we share it, and I have value into it, right? So it's not about trust and all that. It's about having commonality in the destination you're going to, right? Do we understand where we're going? Do we understand what we're trying to do? Do you support it, right? Um,
But my question is, what would enable a team of teams to act as a more coherent cognitive
yeah.
system than a set of silos? That's
I think this is pretty deep, so I'm going to do my
sorry
best with
to
this.
push you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is going to require a little bit of brain power. So you always hear stories about a janitor at NASA. Hey, what do you do here? Well, he's not cleaning the floors. He's trying to put a man on the moon, right? That's what he's trying to do, right? That's a common and shared value goal. Why am I? I'm part of the system to do this thing. Um, I will tell. I will tell you right now, when you go into large organizations and you do use some techniques that we use from the flow system that are in the flow system, excuse me, red teaming techniques, think, write, share. I want to ask everybody in the group, who's your customer? Think about it, write it down, and we'll share it out later. And what you end up finding is they all have different perspectives on who their customer is. And you ask them a similar question. What's our primary goal as this team? And they're like, I don't know. Right. So right there, you already know they're not a team. Right. If they can't define those things or kind of be close on them, that's not it, right? You as a leader or leaders in an organization, that's your job is to kind of. I don't like using alignment, by the way. I like harmony. All right, there's a reason for that.
I like
Um,
that also because I
yeah,
mean we're talking about AI alignment. I'm like, it's so much confusion
no,
there. First of
yeah,
all, humanity is not aligned, so it's like I agree, harmony.
yeah,
Yes, exactly.
yeah. And there's connections back to resonance and the stuff that's coming out of the platonic space and all that. But let's focus on that. So uh, on alignment, let's talk about high school basketball for a moment. A team is aligned when they show up and they go down court and they slow down and they run a play, right? That's alignment. Harmony is the team goes down and they see the affordances in the environment and they adapt to that because what they've already missed when they started to go to that play are those opportunities for action they just gave up, right? So harmony allows them to see those opportunities for action and adapt rapidly. Alignment means I'm going to miss out on those opportunities because I'm internally focused on this one thing I need to do. I'm not looking at the periphery. I'm blind to everything. And now, if we miss something in the environment, we could be going in the wrong direction with our plan. So, um, this is important when we talk about how do you bring um, create flow in an organization. I really believe it starts with leaders' intent, understanding the context, why are we doing something, and what are we doing, right? Why and the what. How, remember this, how is left up to the people that are executing, and that's mission command. Why, how, excuse me, why, what are we doing, and how are we going to do it? Three levels of that.
Totally. And this kind of brings me to this side concept of sense making, which you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
already from the symphony as well, and so on. So you look at this sense making as developing shared mental model, as far as I understand, and at least in the guide, is also about this shared orientation
Mm-hmm.
and narrative. Is that a way to actually achieve harmony, like through this shared orientation, through narrative? Versus, and then I will have another question. How do you achieve this sense making? Because I can see that the team as a behave as a body, then as
Yeah.
a consistent body on the field, when they have these shared narrative, shared mental models, and they communicate with each other more fluently, if I may. um,
Yeah, I think let's go to orientation and mental models. I know some people don't like the idea of mental models and things like that. I really don't. I don't have a dog in that fight. I'm like, hey, I kind of get it. But orientation includes things like we're all different. We're all slightly different, right? Genetically, we're slightly different. We have different cultures. We learn different
we
languages
are
growing
very
up.
different, and yet we are one. I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah.
unity in diversity, right? It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yes. That's where I'm going is the diversity of a group that you're in. If you understand that we all see the world from a different lens somewhat, some of us have strengths and some skills and others. What we're trying to do there is bring that collective together and say, hey, look, your views of the world are important. I need to hear them because I need to update my orientation because I may not be seeing something right. And that's the you have to accept as a leader. You don't understand the world completely. You can't understand the world. No one person can, right? No one person can create situational awareness. Collectively, we can create more situational awareness, more understanding of the external world. So um, you need those introverts just as much as you need the extroverts. And I'm just going to use that as an example. You need to pay attention to the power of neurodiverse folks, right? They see the world from a different lens. They may have the same senses that we do, but they have another connection to their interoceptive self that we may not have, right? So there's a lot of things going on there. So that's a basic understanding of how humans are designed. If you understand that, you can leverage that now through things like leader's intent, commander's intent, mission command, using teaming techniques to bring that together, using a good planning process to leverage the diversity of a crowd, which includes red teaming techniques, think, write, share, a standard, I hate to call it a process, but teamwork is the concept of teaming is a process of teamwork. So you can implement those type of things. You can build that shared mental model of those non-technical skills, those human factor skills, those things that allow us to interact smartly. Those are things that you need to focus on to leverage the power of cognitive diversity within your group, right? Just because you bring a lot of cognitive diverse people into a group doesn't mean you're going to get high performance. And let me explain this from an aircraft analogy. The F-18, when people watch the F-18, the Blue Angels fly. You can, if you pay attention to the stabilizers on the aircraft and the wings, they're moving all the time, right? It's just to keep that thing straight and level. So it's a highly to create the agility that those aircraft need. You need high stability, right? But you also need an interface that allows those things to level out that aircraft and keep it straight and level. So it's the interface of that aircraft that matters, but it's also the diversity, the um, the lack of balance in that aircraft, if you will, that create that agility. It's the same thing is true in a team. You want highly unstable, diverse people working together, but you need an interface that brings them together. And that's what the lessons in the flow system can actually do, is bring that together so you can leverage all these things. Now, I've had interesting discussions with folks during the COVID crisis when that started. HR personnel would say, why am I listening to a white male tell me about how to leverage cognitive diversity? I'm like, first off, I'm not white, and I'm giving you an interface on how to leverage the diversity. What are you doing in your organization to do this? Well, we're just hiring a bunch of random people and calling it good. I'm like, well, that's not how this works, right? So again, I think I'm getting to the heart of this question, and that is, it's the interface, the relationships, the teaming skills, the human factor skills that matter when it comes to building these capabilities in organizations. It's not the frameworks. It's never been the frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's like a membrane. That's what, as you are saying. I just feel like there's this,
Yeah.
porous membrane, so everybody is connected and everybody is moving and it's very dynamic. But this leads me to a question which I don't know if you can, if you can address. But I mean, you and that I feel I really am all aligned with you on this distinction between
Mm-hmm.
alignment and harmony,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, or harmonize. So, is there something that would distinguish uh, this difference, which is like a thin red line, or maybe whatever you want to call it, very thin distinction between alignment and harmony? So, can the OODA actually be captured towards alignment, or being stuck in alignment, or can we use the OODA towards harmony? Does OODA have anything to do with this distinction? Or
Uh,
how do we actually make the distinction?
yeah, that's a great question. So the OODA loop does have so orientation for the group, and I'm going to get this all wrong. I'll try it off the top of my head. Initiative, orientation, harmony, agility, and initiative. IOHAI, right? That is what John Boyd was working on for group dynamics. Let me explain the difference here, right? So if you go back to orientation and you look at it from a cellular or biological perspective or living system perspective, I guess a biological perspective, you have genetics, culture, and experience that make up your orientation, and the new information from the outside world, or surprise or mismatch, right? So, invoking ideas from the free energy principle, when we have a generative model, that new information coming in there updates the model the best we can. Bayesian prediction and all that, or Bayesian theory and all that, predictive processing. For a team, teams don't have genetics, right? So Boyd was working on this closer to his death, where he used IOHAI, right? And so when you think about it, you and I, we have thousands of OODA loops in our bodies, billions probably. But if you just put one around us and say, hey, when we interact, it's our genetics, it's our culture, it's our experiences that make us different from each other and similar. Um, and when you put an OODA loop around us, a team, then your orientation is not about genetics anymore. It's probably more about harmonizing, right? So John Boyd did use harmony quite a bit in his briefs and in his OODA loop sketch. So what's the distinction between alignment and harmony? I'm struggling with this, right? I've been looking back at the. I'm gonna you're gonna laugh at me for this because
I mean,
I've
you
been thinking about.
explained it very well previously.
So I've been looking back at this, the quadrivium, right? Back at music and the difference between like what is rhythm and tempo, and what is the sound of a note do. So we're going back to, ready for this, to geometry of all things to
Yes.
help us
But
understand.
also for orchestra, I mean, it comes to
Yeah,
mind, that is
yeah.
harmony, how they are all in sync with all the instruments and the notes. That,
Well,
yeah.
that is, it's interesting you bring that up. I was going back through I used to be a musician before I came in the Navy and all that. So I was thinking about when we're in tune with each other, right? You could be in tune. You don't have you don't hear the wah, 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 wah going on in your head. For those of you who are not musicians, when you're not in tune, you can hear other frequencies moving around. It doesn't sound right. Plus you hear the wah, 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 wah going on. And the slower that wah, 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 and that goes away, now you're in tune, right? So um, we could be playing different notes and be out of tune, right? We could be out of sync and not be harmonized, right? There's a lot of things going on there. It's another thing from my time as a lead trumpet in a jazz ensemble, and I won a jazz award at Walt Disney World many years ago. When you're a lead trumpet in a jazz ensemble, you're standing in the back center, and you set the, call it the culture, if you want, of that jazz band, right? It emanates from a person, because I can't hear the saxophone 3 people away from me as well as everybody else can hear my interpretation of the music, right? So if I'm late on a beat or anything like that. So harmony is, I don't know. I don't know the best way to explain it right now, but that's why
You,
I'm kind
you
of
know,
like
let
looking
me
at.
tell you how Stephen Grossberg, from the adaptive resonance theory,
Yeah, yeah,
explained it on my podcast, and I will link that,
yeah.
because he also he made his theory similar to this music. So he said, when someone is playing the piano, it's a piano player, right? It's playing the notes, and someone next to that person is playing a violin, but it's not that harmony. So it's not the musician, and you made the distinction here exactly. So when those other notes, wow, 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 are in their
Hmm.
heads, this alignment may because they play the notes, but it's
Hmm.
not. They are not in harmony,
That's
and
it.
so that's the difference. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, there you go. So playing the notes is not the same as playing the music.
Exactly,
There you go.
exactly.
I like that. Thank you.
Amazing. So I have, if unless you wanted to say something else on this one, I
No,
have
no, I'm just
many
fascinated
more
by.
questions.
No, I'm just fascinated by all these connections that I didn't know existed. So the resonance, adaptive resonance theory, like I said, uh, makes all the sense in the world to me. I'm like, that is awesome, and resonance connects to what we're talking about. You pointed me out to Michael Levin's work with Platonic space. That connects back to geometry. There's some great discussions going on now about there might be something else. Let me throw this at you. I don't know if this is true. So when you talk about how do we achieve flow, it's if going back to John Boyd's observer oriented side act loop, on the left side of that, the real OODA loop, there's something called outside information, right? It's just out there, whatever it may be. So these attractor spaces that people are talking about, this fitness landscape, these affordances in the environment, there are these attractors out there that my guess is they're probably harmonic. And harmonics, when you talk about geometry, there's a geometric space between them, right? So you get into phi, you get into Euler's number, maybe you get into the fine structure constant, you get into harmonics, a perfect fifth or whatever and all that. It's the same thing you see with the planets, right? So get it. It's kind of wooish, it's kind of weird, but the idea is emergence is just a great way to say we don't know how that happens, it just happened. A flow state, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get into a state of flow. When you're in the shower, singing a song, when you're running, you get these ideas. Are they your ideas or are they flowing to you from somewhere else, right? That's what's going on there is we're using a flow state to connect to something that's out there, right? And you'll hear about this quite a bit when people come up with ideas. It's not in the moment. It's when they go home, they work out, they're driving, they're fixated or focused on the present situation. They're present, driving their car, listening to their music, and this thing comes out of nowhere, right? You're meditating, you're in deep meditation, and you have these downloads, right? And people are like, well, that's weird. I'm like, well, where do you get your ideas from, man? They just don't, they can't be embedded in you. They got to be borrowed from somewhere else. And it's not wrong to think like that because we're getting into, 4E cognition, the Akashic field, maybe, whatever it may be. It's a little weird, but yeah, okay.
Well, it's not weird at all, I have to say, because actually, I mean, also a mathematician, and
Mhm,
we know that there are these spaces. Yes,
mhm,
that's how we call them. Hilbert spaces are spaces, right? And
yeah,
those are the spaces which Mike Levin also, which
mhm,
have been known since Plato, Platonic spaces. But how
yeah,
it works? So these are offering much more opportunities. What the OODA on the left side was saying, the outer, yeah,
mhm,
the outer. From there, let's call it these outer spaces, larger spaces of mathematics. For example, if I have just one angle and two
mhm,
lines, then I know automatically, and that is the free lunch, that's the free energy. I know
mhm,
automatically that this makes a triangle. That is from that kind of space. So
yeah,
if I'm looking for the solution, it's like then what Mike Levin calls the ingression. Yeah, it's like, okay, the solution is also looking for me. So here is a triangle. So
yeah,
that's how it actually works. It's not woo at all, and of course it is in the same math. It explains the planets and so on and so forth. That's what I wanted to say. That when
mhm,
you're talking about this, and maybe John Boyd was looking at this outer, yes, elements. That's how it works. We have to look at that because, I mean, when we look for something, so when you say download, it's like the solutions are there and they are
mhm.
free. You just have to, and they are just waiting for you to see, right? So it's
So let's build on this more because I think this is fascinating. So in the context of John Boyd's OODA loop, there's a pathway that goes from orient to act. It's called implicit guidance and control.
exactly
It's
orient
intuitive.
and then act. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
now I have the solution.
So it's in this. I'm not talking the linear circular OODA loop. I'm talking the real OODA loop. It goes orient to act. It's called implicit guidance and control. It's intuition. It's Fingerspitzengefühl. It's that fingertip feel you get from experience, right? It's also to me process. And I know a lot of people get upset about that, but habits of mind. When you go out and you practice something, I'll make a connection back to the constraints-led approach from sports. IGNC sits between perception and action, and on the outside are affordances. So what you're trying to do is develop that implicit guidance and control, whether it be through meditation and yoga. It could be technical skills, non-technical skills. It's a skill, it's a process, right? You have to do these things deliberately to build them into your orientation, and then they just flow out of you naturally. It's a low energy approach to doing something internally, right? So by doing that, that gives you access to that outside information. And that to me is what flow is, right? When you talk about John Boyd's OODA loop. And then we could talk about the challenge skill balance, the pathway that you have a flow channel for those that follow Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and Stephen Kotler. That's all we're trying to do is step up through that channel by building that implicit guidance control. Or in other words, we want to build teaming skills, the non-technical skills that you need to create teamwork, to create that harmony in your organization so you can meet the challenges of the external world, right? And this is why we achieve flow. This is one reason we want to be in a flow state. For those of you who've seen the movie F1 in the last year or so, that's a great movie about flow because the only reason he's a car driver is to get into that state of flow. He's chasing flow throughout that movie, right? That's what I believe is going to happen with AI. We are going to I hate to call it superhumans, but what's left? We're not going to be working in the complicated. Yeah, yeah, but nobody's going to go watch a basketball game with machines playing basketball. They're going to want humans playing basketball, soccer, same thing, or football. So you're going to want to go to go see an orchestra play. You're going to want to see some human performance is going to elevate because we'll now have these capabilities. I want to connect it back to the first question you open up with. What are the things I want to learn when I want to know in fighter aviation? I want to know how to achieve a better state of flow. I want to know how to get better faster. I want to know how to do this. AI is going to help. I believe AI is going to help us with that. That's one path. One path. The other path could be the doomsday path, which is we all sit around and look like the movie Idiocracy, right?
And we are working on that because okay, I don't know if you know that the founder of our company, of Singularity Net, also she created the mind of Sophia robot. So,
Mhm.
which is very famous, right? And so, Sophia was being used in meditation sessions, and people mentioned that they feel more comfortable and more relaxed than
Yeah.
with a human who may judge them.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so in that way, yes, you are right on track. But I wanted to say another thing, that because of course I'm a robotics engineer, and a lot of people are watching robot soccer. I don't know if you know, yes,
I don't
because
know anything about this. Huh.
yeah, it is a great test of robotics and autonomy, like agents, autonomous robot. Yes, there are many competitions, and now in high school they are. I mean, in my time they were only like PhDs with their robots from the labs, and they were playing soccer. But now every high school has, I mean, almost every high school. I've been a judge at many robotics competitions. So it may not be like that. You see, I don't want to say that we will be replaced.
But are they autonomous or they? I mean, do they have?
Autonomous. They are autonomous. Yes. Yeah. Autonomous agent. That's my specialty. So
So
that's
they're actively engaged with the environment and learning and adapting, or are they
Oh
just do
yeah, but
they?
that is
Okay.
old, 20 years old. Yes, but it's like aircraft. I mean, also, yeah, it's actively engaging with the environment. Aircraft can fly by itself. You know better than me.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
That's
I
very
don't.
similar
Yeah,
how
yeah.
those robots work. It's like you can
Okay.
leave them, and they adapt, and they are better than us, as you know, from the
Yeah.
cockpit, right? That's exactly how they work. You see, it's a different perspective that I'm opening to you as well. And you're
No,
opening.
no, I didn't know anything about this. And like I said, I think we're on two paths. One is where we become phenomenal humans, or we become subservient to AI. And I'm like, I don't want that. Hopefully it's in the middle somewhere, right?
Not
Uh,
subservient, not subservient. The idea is, I mean, yesterday I recorded a podcast between our CEO, we are actually, our goal is to enable human flourishing. Yes, this AI
yeah,
to enable us to,
yeah,
but it depends on us as well. I mean, if I only want to, smoke drugs and drink, no AI will save me. So it's
no,
also, the accountability is also on me. Yeah. And,
yeah.
so that's the idea. I will of course also post that
Oh, that's
that
fascinating.
recording.
So that actually, so on the external environment, using some type of robot to help you with meditation. What does that do? It removes the judgment, right, from another human. So
Exactly, and you
you're
can be more relaxed,
so what do you
because
do? You're changing constraints of that system, right?
less
I think.
pressure, less
Yeah,
pressure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So there are, and this is what I'm talking about. So when we use things, I use a brain tap device to do meditation and breathing exercise. I'll go hide in the closet and do it because I'm kind of like my kids were like, "Dad, you're weird," um, but it's the
That's
same thing.
no,
I'm
that's
using.
very good, because I mean, at the Consciousness Conference, there was a particular session dedicated to this headset, these devices. So they are
Yeah.
very much in vogue right now, and
Well, let's build a snowmobile here. Let's build this all up. Okay, let's build a future state where we're bringing these things from the flow system, flourishing as well. What you're talking about with AI and meditation and breathing techniques. So, what's a team going to look like in the future? Well, they'll meditate on their own. They're going to do some like vagus nerve breathing before they do a planning session. Um, they're going to open up their minds more to see more. There may be the use of yoga, meditation, or other modalities like psychedelics in the planning session. And we're going to use AI to help enable this team, right? So it could be a sports team, it could be a software development team, it could be a board of directors, right? It doesn't matter. But this is what I think is going to happen, and they're all connected to flow. All right, 100%. Yeah.
But because I mean, flow is nothing more. The thing is that yeah, in this three series podcast, but that is the science of consciousness, right?
Hmm.
Um, Consciousness is a field. That's how it acts as a field, and of course there are still people who don't believe that it's fundamental, but it is fundamental, and now more and more proofs are coming, and of course Mike Levin also, that is the idea. But the
Yeah.
point is we do not have access to it, right? And through meditation, that's how we open our channels to have access to it, because in fact this is physical. That's what
Yeah.
like from the, sorry to be using terms from biology, like from in anesthesia, this has been proven,
Yep.
because that's clear, from microtubules, and they vibrate through this vicinal water and so on. But it's like from the cell to the organist and further, and around us there's a field which resonates in this manner through the
Yeah.
electromagnetic field of the earth.
Yeah.
So neuromodulation is a way for us to enable us, and it is using, in my opinion, neuromodulation is like making us a big cyborgs, but
Yeah.
it works on our. It opens the access to this field. It opens the channels to this field, and
Yeah.
that's what meditation achieves. So that is, in my opinion, and I think that's how we can really describe it. Access flow is actually when you completely have access to the field, if I may call it
Yeah.
this way.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. It's that, if you use psychedelics, and I'll use psychedelics to explain the OODA loop. So, what do psychedelics do? They push your ego down, your default mode of operating. They give you access to higher entropic states, which allow you to see things differently. This sounds like teamwork to me, right? That's what we're trying to do with red teaming. We're trying to do the same thing, push the ego down. Same with psych safety, trying to push the ego down, create an environment, an internal environment where you can have greater access to outside information, right? And share that outside information. That's the same thing. So what we're getting at here is the scale-free nature of, if you want to call it the OODA loop or free energy principle, active info, whatever it may be. Pick your favorite thing. Perceptual control theory, ecological dynamics. To me, they're just looking at the OODA loop from different lenses, going, this is what the OODA loop is to me. It's bigger than that. So what's happening now is we're starting to see that the fractal nature of things, repeating concepts, if you want to call it that, from different fields is, I think, going to unite us in a way that we never have felt before. And that's it's just weird because former fighter.
It's only weird. You call it weird because we were not taught this in school, and we have mental
No.
past. It's not weird at all. It's weird the other
Yeah,
way. But
I would, if you told me I'd be talking about this on a podcast 20 years ago, I'd punch myself, because this is
that's
not
right,
what.
because it's a mental
Yeah.
cast. That's how we were trained.
Yeah, but it seems to be the science is supporting the things that you and I are talking about, the things you're talking about. Just continue to follow the science and realize that science isn't set, right? We always are evolving things and going, you know what, we didn't have this right. We context matters. What we knew back then made sense, but what we know now, we may need to go back and go through that cycle of destruction and creation, which, by the way, is the first paper that John Boyd wrote, was destruction and creation, right?
So it's science also validated by our experience, with those
Mm-hmm.
meditative states and flow, as
Mm-hmm.
well as by experiments. Yeah, as Michael
Yeah.
Levin is doing, and many others. And on our podcast, we talk all the time about this. So here is not not a place where to really not talk about this. But I wanted,
Yeah.
to touch on something which, like these free lunches. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
are more or less free. You need to nudge the system to show it something in order to
Yeah.
get the free lunch. But this kind of, for me, ties into this weak signal detection,
Mm-hmm.
which you mentioned. And I wanted to talk about this a bit because it ties into many of my, questions with ethics and so on. So if the weak signals are the early smoke, that the system is at risk and so on, or at
Mm-hmm.
opportunity, how do you manage to make the weak signal visible, not to be dismissed
Yeah.
as insignificant?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So let's. So we got inattentional blindness. For those of you who may be familiar with the the many years ago, I can't remember the name of the little video, but kids dribbling a basketball, and you count the number of times the basketballs are dribbled, and in the background a gorilla walks by, and they ask you later, did you see the gorilla? Chances are you didn't see the gorilla. Why? Because that's not what you're paying attention to, right? So the same thing is true in our day-to-day work. We have this thing called these biases, inattentional blindness. We only see what we expect to see. And then you get into psych safety. And there's an interesting connection here. I can't remember the name of the research that came out, but roughly 17% of a group, doesn't mean the same 17%, are going to see things that others don't see. They're actually there, but the 83% don't see it. Now imagine you don't have a psychologically safe environment, and 80% of the people you're around are telling you you're crazy because they didn't see it. And then you start going, well, I didn't see it. Excuse me, if 80% of the people around me didn't see it, there might be something wrong with me. Well, we want to flip that script. That 17 to 20%, those weak signals that we're getting, we want to create an environment, an affordance, if you will, to allow those insights to be shared, right? So how do you do that? That's what red teaming does. We use something, many basic things. Think, write, share. I mentioned that earlier, right? There's other tools out there. There's stuff like Dave Snowden put out there with Sensemaking. There's the future backwards. There are complex facilitation techniques that we can use to identify weak signal detection. And why is this important? Because when we understand what's going on in the environment, we can start to map that a little bit to help us build that quote unquote digital twin we need to understand how to adapt to a changing environment. So going back to John Boyd's OODA loop, that those weak signal detection approaches allow us to create a better orientation or internal map of the external world, right? And when we see the world for what we think it is, and by the way, all maps are wrong, right? So
Yes,
we want to create.
it's not the territory. Remember
Yeah,
that.
yeah. But we want to continue to try to push that, and that's what orientation does in a group: is how can we create the best generative model or internal map of the external world? By the way, that's called a strategy, so we can adapt and figure out what we want to do. Most organizations don't understand that. They think a strategy is something that McKinsey hands them and they try to execute, right? So back to your question, we have to understand like our heuristics and biases as humans. We're not going to get rid of them. We need to find ways to mitigate them within a group, mitigate them. We're not going to eliminate them again, and leverage the diversity of a crowd, right? Of the people that are on the team or the organization to see what others don't see, right? So we're getting into Gary Klein space, naturalistic decision making, things like that, recognition prime decision making. So it's usually the non-experts that see things that others don't see, right?
Exactly. And this is where I want because of course they have a different perspective, but there's another aspect, I think, which you also touch in your work, which is this psychological safety, which I also mentioned with the robot when I meditate. I'm not judged and so on. But,
Yeah.
if 80% of people tell me I'm wrong, and if I see something like the CEO made the wrong decision, which will harm people down the line, and I feel like I need to say something, but everybody is quiet around me and say, are you crazy? So how can we avoid that? Like, this is also, how can we strengthen the signal through psychological safety?
Yeah. So this goes back many years. So if you look at the origins of psychological safety, you look at Amy Edmondson's work and you look at where she studied, she observed healthcare teams that were trained by, ready for this, aviators on crew resource management. And I've had a conversation with her about this, and it's in her latest book. She talks about high reliability theory, team science, CRM, all these things that we just talked about. I remember having that conversation 2 years before she wrote that book. But anyway, psych safety is a local construct, meaning that you have your actions, if we're on a team, will determine my behaviors, right? Am I going to share information with you if I feel safe around you, right? So it's a local construct. It can't be mandated or dictated from a CEO that, hey, this is a safe place. My door's always open. That's not psych safety, right? It's your leadership actions. And let me give you an example of one. Fighter aviation, the art and science of debriefing. One of the first things a leader, a mission commander will do is they'll admit a failure, something they did wrong, a shortcoming, right? So they're showing that humility. They're showing that they're not perfect. And they're doing that in front of a group of type A personalities, big egos, right? So what that does, it creates conditions in the environment that allow me to feel safe, to speak up and share things that I see, right? That's a local construct thing. It's not going to work in a 500 person organization if one person does it. It's going to be the perceived leader of that group who does it. And this is where Agile went wrong, by the way. I think one of the places they outsourced that leadership moment to a scrum master or an Agile coach who has no bearing on how the team performs, right? Other than, hey, I'm here to coach you through these things. It has to be a perceived leader or an actual leader on the team that set these conditions, right? So psych safety, what else can you do? I'm sorry, I was wrong. And then